Now, I think my talk was called The Deeper Current. So it's going to be slightly different from what's gone before, because I'll just tell you right now, I am not a professional researcher, and neither am I a professional author. Both of those things I do, but very, very amateurly, really, to serve my storytelling. So storytelling is my passion. Speaking with people is my passion. Telling of stories is my passion. That's what I love. And until about a year ago, I was a founder of the International School of Storytelling in East Sussex, which some of you I know. And for many, many years, I worked with mythology, as we would all understand mythology, from all over the world. But about 10 years ago, I started to be more and more interested in personal mythology. Was that even possible? Was it even possible that we could think of having a personal mythology? Is it even possible that we could think of ourselves in mythic terms? And what might that mean, if we could, to the way that we might live our lives? And in fact, what might it mean for me in the way that I live my life? How might that change me? So that quest, really, for bringing together mythology with the personal myth, with the personal story, with the story of our lives, which we just heard so beautifully, really, from you, Jay. You gave us a real, what I would call a mythic moment there, which is what I was doing this morning in the workshop. It was lovely. You know, what can really happen at that point, and what can that bring to the world, and how can we shape and tell our stories in such a way that it is a gift to the people who hear it, and that those stories, just like the myths before them, might go out into the world and travel and be told from one person to another, just like a traditional story might be. So that's been my investigation, and about a year ago I decided I'd throw it all up in the air, and I left the School of Storytelling and I abandoned that wonderful place that has nurtured me for 22, 23 years. And I've struck out really just exploring this whole realm of the personal. So that's really what I'm bringing. I'm going to be bringing some thoughts and explorations of where I am with that today. Now we're heading towards that twilight hour that Jay mentioned. We're heading towards that time when things are not quite what they seem to be. And would you not say it's true of us too? We look at each other, we look at each other's faces, we talk, we exchange words. But do we really know what is under the surface? Do we really know what the deeper current of someone's life is? Of the moments where they have found meaning? The times and the things that have happened to them that have given them a lifeline or a beacon in the midst of confusion. We heard earlier about when the hunters hunt and the animals are sacrificed, and that there comes a time when the mask is removed. So what does it mean if we could remove our masks? What could it mean if we could tell each other the stories of our lives and speak about what is meaningful to us in a way where we don't have to wear a mask? We can let that go. And those masks can mean many things, can't they? The mask of personality, the mask of persona, the mask of our beliefs, our opinions, the mask of our colour, our nationality, all those things. What would it really look like to drop all those masks and just be able to stand and tell the story, tell the real mythic story of our lives in all its massive symbolism, you know, in all its glorious technicolor, in all its terror and all its joy? I really want to know. And I don't have all the answers. I just want to say that really clearly. I don't have all the answers, but I'm a passionate investigator. So, let's see where we go then. All right, who here is older than 35? Oh, just barely. Did I hear it just barely? Yeah, even if you're just barely, you can put your hands up. That's great. So there's quite a lot of people here. Now, when I work with people with their personal stories and help them shape them and craft them, I've noticed there's a very interesting thing that seems to happen around the age of 35. People just seem to go off on another direction. I mean, I don't know if it's happened to anyone in the room. There's a couple, you're nodding, Vicky, because, right, great. Well, that happened to me. That happened to me. So I'd just like to tell you a little bit about that. When I was at school, this is a long time ago, I was equally good at the arts and the sciences. But it was at a time when the economy was really bad in the UK, and everyone said to me, look, be really sensible. Train as a scientist, and then you can get a job. And if you like the arts, you can do that in your spare time, can't you? Because everybody knows you can knock up a book just like that, or write a few pieces of poetry, or if you want to paint, you know, you can do that when you've done your 9-to-5 job. So what did I know? I followed their advice. So I trained as a scientist. I trained as an analytical chemist. That was my first training, and I worked as a researcher in lung disease, actually. That's why I don't smoke, sorry. But that was my first job. And after quite a few years of finding myself inside laboratories, doing things with test tubes, wearing a white coat and not really talking to many people and feeling a bit sad about the state of the world, actually, and being exposed to carcinogenic drugs, you know, and all that kind of stuff, you know, carcinogenic chemicals that you do when you're working in that kind of industry. I really had it. It was just not me. And I didn't know what was me anymore, because I followed the path that other people had told me to take, and it seemed to lead me nowhere. So because I didn't know what I wanted to do, I thought the best thing to do would be to head out into the unknown. So it was at that point that I sold my possessions, and I gave up my flat, and I had that very hard conversation with my boyfriend at that time. I think I was about 22 then. And we separated, and I went out into the world and travelled around for 5 years with rucksack, you know, on my own through the world, and had many adventures. Really, really enjoyed it. But after 5 years, there was one thing that I really hated about the whole thing. And that was, I really hated being poor. Because, you know, when you travel, you know, you can travel, the less money you spend, the longer you can travel. You know, it's really simple. You have like you know, you don't spend much, you can maybe have an extra week in that country. Wow, you know, great. So I just kind of had this kind of poverty mentality, and I tried to keep going for as long as possible, and I did loads of jobs, but eventually I just couldn't hack it. And what I wanted was money, more than anything else in the world. So I came back to the UK, and I discovered that the best way to make a lot of money was to use my scientific training, use my brain, but use it in service of something far more lucrative than being in a laboratory. No. The money in the 80s was in sales and marketing and big business. And so that's where I went. And I learnt how to sell things to people. And I learnt how to match my breathing to the person you're talking to. You know, make them feel you're really on their side. I can't believe I did all this. I can't believe I'm telling you I did all this. And I was in the computer industry, and I sold loads and loads of really great computers to loads and loads of really fantastic people, and I had loads and loads of money, and I bought a couple of houses, and I had nice cars, and I had a lifestyle. Really, I did. But then when I was 35, something happened. And that is, an old boyfriend sent me a ticket to a festival, a storytelling festival. with a little note saying, Sue, you always did love stories. And there's a storytelling festival starting down the road from me. It was beyond the border, which some of you may know. And he said, look, I'm going with a group of people. He was married by then. He was going with his wife, who I knew very well and liked. There's a whole group of us going, why don't you bring your tent and come along to this? And I thought, wow, how lovely. A weekend just listening to stories. You know, that would just be so relaxing. Such a change from jetting around the world, you know, doing all this kind of that and the other that I was doing in business. So I went. I got there on the Friday evening at dusk, at the time when things are not really what they seem to be. And I pitched my tent and out I went to listen to stories. And I can honestly tell you that I can't remember a single thing of what happened to me until Sunday morning. All I know is, could be anything, couldn't it now? I've got you. No, it was the stories. It was the stories. Because I was sitting there looking up at like the stage, and there were these, I mean, I can tell you just gods and goddesses up there on stage telling these amazing stories from India, from Africa, from Greece, from all over the world. And I sat there with my mouth open. And the stories seemed to come in through my mouth and through my ears and through every pore of my body. And I could feel myself filling up with some magical substance that I hadn't had since I was a child. And I felt like laughing, I felt like crying, I felt like running. I felt so full of energy and life. I felt full of life. And I thought, this is what I need to do. So at 35, I chucked my corporate career. I threw out all my suits. I got rid of my BMW. And I became a storyteller. Now, when I'm working with other people, I hear all kinds of versions of that story. At around about 35 or 36, so I just knew I couldn't carry on doing that any longer, people say to me. Or they say, I don't know what it was, but around 35, 36, I started to feel so restless and my life started to feel so small and I couldn't breathe and I kept thinking, what is it I really want to do? And what am I doing with my life anyway? I've had 35 years and what have I got to show for it? There was just this huge upswelling of restlessness and wanting something more, something deeper, something more meaningful to make a difference in the world. And I'll tell you something, I love working with people around those stories about how they just gave everything up and did something different, or how they just saw the light, they had a road to Damascus moment and they just thought, no, this is what I must do, or where they threw everything up and just took the road, whatever it was. But the storytelling changed me. The stories changed me, because up until then my lovely, rational, logical left brain, so well trained with my degree in chemistry and my master's in business administration, specializing in statistics, you know, everything in the world was so logical, you know, I could work it all out. But you know what? You can't use that brain to work out stories. They just don't work like that. Stories, the stories I was working with then, with what you would call the mythology and all those other wonderful stories, they don't work logically, as you know. They belong to this twilight time. They belong to this place where things are not what they seem. And for the first 3 years that I was telling stories, I didn't know what I was doing. I don't mean that I didn't know technically, because I went and took myself to a very good 3-month full-time storytelling training. So I knew what I was doing technically, or at least I thought I did. But I didn't have a clue what was going on in those stories because I didn't have the hard wiring. I didn't have the neural pathways. I didn't have the understanding of images or of symbols. I didn't know how to decode this new world that I was being presented with. And my memories of those first 3 years are of deep frustration, of working with a story and feeling that I knew what it was about, and then having a conversation with someone and they would say, oh yes, I can see that story is so perfect, isn't it? Because it's all about this. And I would think, I hadn't even seen that. I hadn't even seen it. I felt like a baby, but worse than a baby because I was a grown woman and there was this whole other world that I didn't know anything about. I'll give you an example. Just short stories that just, let's see what's coming. Hang on, I'll just wait for a story to come. So do you know how it is if you're a storyteller? If anyone's in the audience who's a storyteller, sometimes you just have to wait and go, and then something comes and there's a story. So here we go. So for example, I remember being told this story. I told it myself later on when I knew what I was about, many years later. Once upon a time, there was a businessman. He lived in America, shall we say, and he had a wonderful big organization, and he had a big, big problem. And there was just no one he could turn to get some advice. He tried all the business gurus, he read all the books, he went for life coaching and business coaching and any kind of coaching you can think of, and no answers came. And at last he heard that in Japan there was a Zen master who could answer any kind of question. So he had one of his secretaries book his flight. He had another of the secretaries phone and get in contact with someone who knew the Zen master. And within a flash, it was all organised. He found himself on a plane from America to Japan. He had just a few hours before he had to fly back, but everything was really sorted out. The limo was waiting for him at the airport. He sped off to the place where the Zen master lived. He knocked on the door of the address, and the door opened. And there stood a beautiful young woman. And she said, oh, you've come for your appointment with the master. Please follow me. They walked through a beautiful garden, fountains. Well, you just imagine any kind of beautiful garden you like, full of sweet scents maybe, wonderful plants and colours growing up all around. But the businessman didn't see any of that because, you know, he had a plane to catch and he had a question that he wanted to ask, and he was waiting to see the Zen master. So he followed on as fast as he could behind the girl, and eventually they came to a pavilion. And there was a table, and she told him to sit. So there were no chairs, so he thought, well, I'm in Japan. So he sat down and he waited. And he waited. And at last, a paper screen was pulled aside, and there was the Zen master. I've got this terrible problem, said the businessman. I really, really need some advice. Wait. 2 teacups came, a pot of tea. Okay, thought the businessman, of course, I'm in Japan, there's some kind of tea ceremony, we'll just get through that and then I'll ask the question. He was like, I hope I'm going to be okay to catch the taxi back to the airport. The Zen master picked up the teapot very slowly, and he began to pour the tea into the businessman's cup, a beautiful porcelain cup. It slowly filled up, and it came to the top and began to brim, and it fell over the edges, and it filled the saucer, and now the tea was pouring out all over the table, and still the Zen master hadn't stopped pouring. And at last the businessman said, stop, what are you doing? It's pouring out all over the table. Yes, said the Zen master, you are like this teacup. You are so full to the brim of everything you know. There is no space for me to tell you anything. And that's what I was in those years. A teacup full to the brim, with no room for the wisdom of the story to really speak to me. When I heard that story, in its gentle way, in the way that stories can, they just let you figure it out for yourself, don't they? They don't say, Sue, you are a complete idiot. They just go, could you be like this teacup, Sue? And you go, oh yes, perhaps I could be. And that's one of the other things about story, is it's not sort of preachy, and it's not judgmental, and it's not like this is the right way to live your life or this is the wrong way to live your life. It just says, look at this. Does it speak to you? And maybe it does. And then maybe your life is changed. So my question with personal stories really is, can we actually tell a story in such a way that it could be like that? It could be non-judgmental. It could be open. It could be spacious. It could have room for multiple levels of knowing, multiple levels of understanding, that every person who listens could take what they need from that story, and perhaps when they hear it again, they might hear something completely different, because by then, they're a different person. I'm just going to pause, and I'm just going to have a look at the time to see how I'm doing, all right? Because, you know, it's late in the day, and you've heard 3 speakers, so I'll just see how I'm doing. How are we doing?
We're fine.
Yeah?
Yeah, another 10-15 minutes.
Right, okay. So let's have a group experiment. Okay, why not? Come on. I mean, we might as well, mightn't we? Here we are. We're all interested in stories and mythology. We're all exploring, and we all want to make changes in our life and become as much as we can be. Probably all the people in this room. We all want to become as much as we can be. So I'm going to try something, a mass experiment, okay? I'm going to tell you a little story. And then I'm going to ask you to just have a quick conversation with someone close to you who you might not know very well. So there's no preconceived ideas, all right? You up for that? And then we'll come back and see what's happened. Does that sound all right? You awake enough for that? Yeah? Yeah? Okay. Just checking. All right. Okay, let's see. One of the landscapes in the world that I am very connected to is in southern Africa. I'm very connected to the deserts of the Kalahari, the mountains, all those beautiful places. And I often work in that region of the world every year. So here's a little tiny story that comes from that area. And then we'll see what happens with it. So watch out, because it's about that big, okay? So once upon a time, there were some anthropologists who wanted to study rock art. You know, those beautiful paintings like you get in France, where they're all over southern Africa by the Bushmen, yeah? And they've lived there for thousands, millions of years almost, you can imagine, doing their paintings on the rocks, and the anthropologists wanted to study them. So they'd got some Bushmen to take them to a particular place in the desert where there was said to be a huge rock, and on that rock were the most exquisite examples of Bushman cave art. So they set off through the desert, and they walked and they walked and they walked, and I imagine it was hot, and I imagine they walked a long way, and I imagine they might have been out there for days and days and days, but at last they came to the rock. And the anthropologists looked at the rock, and they couldn't see anything. There was nothing there. Not a single painting was to be seen. And they turned to the Bushmen and said, you know, what's happened? Well, why have you brought us here? And the Bushmen started laughing and taking water, which they had in pouches around their waist. They took the water and they flung it onto the rock. And as the water hit the rock, the pictures burst out in radiant colour. So my question to you is just to sit there for a moment and ask yourself, who or what in that story do you identify with right now? Just silently, just for yourself. Who or what do you identify with in that story right now? Identify is quite a head word. It might not come to you like that. It might be just that your attention is caught by a particular image in that story, okay? And in which case, that's good enough for me. Follow that, okay? So who or what catches your attention in that story, and why is my question. All right. So what I'm going to invite you to do is just find another person who you don't seem to know very well or haven't really bonded with yet, who's, you know, remember people are sitting behind you, they're often the people you might not see because they're in your backspace, and just for a couple of minutes have a chat with that person about what caught their attention, or, you know, what they identify with in that story, and then we're going to come back and we're going to have a little chat about it, okay? All right. Like at the front, it was like being inside a really busy beehive. It was great because it was like buzz all around, and I had the feeling that something sweet was being made actually in the conversation. So I'm going to make this little experiment now. Whatever you spoke about, whatever attracted you in the story, and I said to you who or what, or drew your attention, or did you identify and why? Was anyone able to identify why they were drawn to something in particular? Would be willing to? Oh yes, okay. Would you be willing to say what you were drawn to and why?
Yeah. The bushman and the laughter. And
the bushman. So just choose one thing, whatever was the bushman.
In terms of a person, it was his role in that whole proceeding.
Ah, okay. So the bushman who. Right. Okay. So the bushman. All right. And do you know why you were drawn to the bushman?
Yeah. It's the role I usually take on, but I've never seen it in that way before.
Oh, what, like as a guide? Do you mean as a bushman as a guide, or the bushman as a revealer?
As a revealer in the face of people coming in going, there's nothing there. And
Ha ha ha! Oh, fantastic! Thank you.
So yeah, really clearly.
Oh, great. That's really clear. Thank you so much. Did anybody else identify with something and be willing to say why? Yes, Dawn?
The water.
The water?
Yes, the water. And what it meant to me was, it's not what you think. You know, we going along the road and going, well, I'm willful enough to know what I want, but actually something completely different is going on that's much richer and more beautiful, and I can't see it with my limited vision. I need the peripheral vision for the water to be able to make this magic.
And do you know why you were attracted to the water at this moment in your life at all?
I think because that's what I'm doing.
You're doing,
I'm noticing the water, and I'm going where the water is rather than
in your life right
Yeah,
now?
yeah.
Oh, I see. So that's exactly, and the water's in movement, isn't it?
Yeah.
It moves from the bushman's pouches onto the wall. Edward, you had something?
I'm the stone.
Stone, the actual rock itself, the
Yeah.
stone. And
Because I feel that the water revealed parts of myself that I'm not yet aware of.
ah,
My left and right brain were then able to see those parts and then actually understand them in different ways.
all right. And do you feel that that's how it is for you in your life right now? That
Yeah,
there's
exactly.
parts of you that you haven't yet been revealed to yourself.
Exactly, yeah.
Beautiful, thank you. We'll take one more. Oh, right at the back.
Oh, you can share it.
And actually it was wonderful. That was the colour of the stone. And I immediately wanted to not be deaf and be a person. And then we shared it and we both had the same experience. We were the emerging colour.
You were the emerging colour.
Yeah.
And do you each know what the colour was for you?
Mine was multicoloured, but I don't know.
Mine was really multicoloured.
Multicoloured. Okay, so if I can ask you both. Oh, there's a lot of stone and rock worshippers here. It's great, I love it. Can I ask you both, is there anything in your life right now that's speaking to you when I say to you that what you chose was multicoloured and was a rock?
It really spoke to me.
How does it speak to you about your life right now?
An experience of myself as being the stone and being hidden and then suddenly being multicoloured and multifaceted and being revealed.
Do you want to be revealed right now more?
I'm happy to be revealed.
You're happy to be revealed. Isn't that lovely? She's happy to have the water thrown at her. She's happy to reveal herself in all her multicoloured gloriousness. And for you, does it ring true for anything in your life at the moment?
Very much so, yeah. I've just started to show people my work, my painting.
Oh
And I've
my
been
God.
painting since I was a child, but I have had reservations really, I think, about and confidence problems about showing people my work. And I've just sort of come out of the closet.
No wonder you chose that.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you for those of you who are willing to share. Oh yes, one more. Yes, why not?
What if in equal measure you're both the looker and the revealer?
Beautiful. You're in mythic territory, aren't you? You know, because stories are never the either or, are they? You know, it's always all of us, isn't it? All muddled up together. I am the bushman. I am the pouch. I am the rock. I'm the desert. I'm the cave paintings. I am the laughter. And so are all of you. But the 17th century mystic Jacob Boehme said, whatever the self describes the self. And this is the wonderful thing about stories, is what we notice describes us. What we see and what we pay attention to is speaking to us. Jung says symbols are the way the world speaks to us. And they speak to us through stories. So I just want to leave you perhaps with this little thought, which actually is Jung again. As you can see, I'm going through a bit of a Jung stage. Okay, I'm reading a lot of Jung at the moment. I'm not always quoting Jung quite so much as I am today. But here's one. I was just looking it up on the train so I could get it right for you, actually. Because for me, this is what happens. This is the link, if you like, between the stories that we know and love from other countries and from other mythologies and the story that we have inside ourselves. And he says, we meet ourselves time and time again in 1,000 different disguises on the path of life. So I'd just like to leave that with you. You all there and me here with all our thousands of different disguises. And maybe, you know, through the art of telling our own stories, we can take more and more of the disguises off so that at last we can stand in front of people just truly ourselves. Thank you.